On the night Amina Okoye gave away the last meal she could afford, she was not trying to be noble. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was not hoping for a miracle. She was simply too tired to ignore another human being shivering in the rain. What she did not know was that by sunrise, the old man everyone at the terminal had dismissed as a beggar would be the one man with the power to decide whether her daughter lived or died. And when that truth came out, an entire hospital would be forced to answer for the kind of cruelty that hides behind polished walls, air-conditioned offices, and smiling promises. Amina was 32 years old, but hardship had a way of adding extra years to her face. She lived in a one-room apartment on the edge of Lagos with her 8-year-old daughter Zuri, and every inch of that room carried evidence of a life held together by sacrifice. A mattress on the floor, a rusted standing fan that worked only when it wanted to, a cracked plastic table, a sewing machine by the window because at night, after cleaning offices all day, Amina repaired school uniforms for neighbors just to keep food on the table. She had once been the kind of woman who laughed easily, the kind who sang while washing dishes, the kind who believed hard work would eventually bring relief. But life had pressed that softness out of her slowly, year after year, bill after bill, disappointment after disappointment. Still, if there was one place where the old version of Amina survived, it was in the way she looked at Zuri. Zuri was small for her age, with bright, searching eyes and a smile that somehow refused to disappear, even after months of hospital visits. She loved drawing houses with huge windows and gardens full of yellow flowers. She said that when she got better, she wanted to live in a home where the rain sounded beautiful instead of frightening. But for the last 6 months, the rain had frightened them both, because every hospital appointment seemed to bring worse news. The first doctors had said Zuri's heart murmur was manageable. The second said it was more serious than they thought. The third, a quiet specialist with tired eyes, finally told Amina the truth she had been dreading. Zuri needed surgery. Not next year, not when possible, not after fundraising and waiting and paperwork and polite delays. Soon, very soon. Without it, her condition would worsen until her little body simply could not fight anymore. There was one private pediatric center in the city with the equipment and surgical team capable of handling the case immediately. It was called the Adewale Children's Cardiac Institute, and to people like Amina, it might as well have been built on the moon. The fees were impossible. The deposit alone was larger than everything she could earn in years. The only chance was an emergency compassion grant from the hospital's charitable foundation. So Amina applied. She waited. She prayed. She returned with documents. She waited again. Then, 3 days before Zuri's final pre-surgical review, she was told the grant board had deprioritized her case. That was the word the woman at the desk used. Deprioritized. As if her daughter's life had simply slipped lower on a spreadsheet. Amina did not cry in the hospital. She had learned not to give them that satisfaction. She stood there with both hands gripping the strap of her worn handbag, while the receptionist repeated policy in a voice so polished it sounded rehearsed. "Madam, your file is still active, but the board is currently favoring cases with matching co-funding commitments." Co-funding commitments. In plain language, it meant, if you are poor, your child can wait. And sometimes, waiting is another word for dying. That evening, the sky opened over Lagos with the kind of rain that made traffic lights look like smudged paint. Amina had spent the day chasing signatures, pleading with clerks, and calling numbers that never connected. Her phone battery was almost dead. Her shoes were soaked through. In her bag, she had just enough cash to buy one small meal before going home to Zuri. She stopped at a roadside stall near the bus terminal and counted the coins twice. One portion of bean cakes, one sachet of water, maybe bread if the woman felt generous. That was all. The vendor wrapped the food in paper and handed it over. Amina took it and tucked it carefully inside her bag as if she were protecting treasure. For a moment, she allowed herself to think only of getting home, of Zuri, of feeding her daughter, of pretending everything would somehow be fine for one more night. Then she saw him. An old man sat hunched on a metal bench under the leaking roof of the terminal. His clothes were clean once, but now wrinkled and rain-stained. His shoes were expensive, though badly scuffed. Water dripped from the edge of his gray hair. His hands trembled, whether from cold or exhaustion, Amina could not tell. People passed him without slowing down. A few glanced at him and looked away quickly, the way people do when they are afraid compassion will cost them something. The old man tried to stand, failed, and sank back down. Amina froze. In another life, maybe she would have kept walking. Maybe survival would have won. Maybe the meal in her bag would have stayed in her bag. But something about the way he sat there, proud, silent, trying not to look helpless, reminded her too much of what suffering does to people when the world wants them invisible. She stepped toward him before she could talk herself out of it. "Sir," she said softly, "are you all right?" The old man looked up slowly. His eyes were sharp despite his condition, the kind of eyes that had spent a lifetime studying people. But now they were clouded with pain and fatigue. "I'm fine," he said. It was the kind of lie old people tell when dignity is the last thing they still control. Amina glanced at his shaking hands, then at her bag, then back at his face. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she pulled out the paper-wrapped food and held it toward him. "Please," she said, "eat something." The old man stared at the meal in silence. "No," he said at last. "That may be your dinner." "It was," Amina replied. "Now it is yours." He looked at her longer this time. Not like a man accepting charity, like a man trying to understand why it was being offered. Beside the bench, a gust of rain blew inward and dotted Amina's face with cold water. She wiped her forehead and forced a small smile. "I have known hunger," she said, "and I have known what it feels like when people pretend not to see you. Eat." Something changed in his expression then. Not relief, not gratitude exactly. Something deeper, something almost painful. He took the packet with both hands. "Thank you," he said quietly. Amina bought him tea with the last of her coins. She did not know that this simple act, a cheap paper-wrapped meal and a cup of hot tea, would tear open secrets buried behind the walls of the city's most respected hospital. The old man's name, though she did not know it then, was Chief Tunde Adewale. For 40 years, his name had carried weight in boardrooms, ministries, donor circles, and medical foundations across West Africa. He had built schools, funded clinics, and attached his family name to the very cardiac institute that now held Zuri's future in its hands. But age had done what money could not. It had made him restless. In the months before that rainy night, Chief Adewale had begun to suspect that the charitable foundation he built in memory of his late wife was no longer serving the children it claimed to protect. Reports reached him in fragments. Numbers looked cleaner than reality. Cases were being filtered through language that sounded efficient but felt cold. The executives called it sustainability. The board called it strategic allocation. Tunde called it what it was: cowardice dressed in professional language. That afternoon, before the rain began, he had walked out of a private meeting at the institute after hearing one of the trustees describe low-income children as high-cost, low-return cases. His own nephew, Kunle, the acting chairman of the foundation, had said nothing to stop it. So the old man left without security, without driver, without announcement. And by nightfall, soaked, exhausted, and furious with the machine built in his name, he found himself sitting in a public terminal, being fed by a woman who clearly had less than almost anyone he had ever met. After he finished eating, Amina asked if he had somewhere to go. "I had somewhere," he said, looking out at the rain. "Now I'm not sure." It was a strange answer, but Amina was too tired to study it. She reached into her bag again and pulled out the small wrapper the vendor had used to cover the bread. "It's not much," she said, placing it beside him. "Use it to wipe your face." Then she hesitated, fighting the instinct to leave. "My daughter is sick," she said suddenly. The words came out because exhaustion makes confessions easier. "She needs surgery. I went to beg people today, but they said her life must wait for approval." The old man turned toward her fully. "What is your daughter's name?" "Zuri." "And how old is she?" 8. "What kind of surgery?" Amina swallowed. "The kind poor people are expected to die before they can afford." For the first time that night, Chief Adewale dropped his gaze. There was no reply to a sentence like that. Not if you still had a conscience. A bus roared into the terminal. Passengers surged forward. Amina stepped back, adjusting the strap on her shoulder. "I have to go," she said. "Please don't sleep in this rain." The old man nodded. Then, as if something inside him refused to let the moment end there, he asked, "What is your name?" "Amina." "Amina," he repeated carefully, like a man committing it to memory. She walked away without looking back. By the time she reached home, Zuri was asleep on the mattress with one hand resting over a drawing book. Amina knelt beside her and stared at the child's face in the dim room. Children always look healthier when they are sleeping. It is one of the cruelest illusions in the world. On the open page beside her was a drawing of 3 people holding hands under a giant umbrella. At the top, in shaky handwriting, Zuri had written, "Me, Mummy, and a person God will send." Amina sat there for a long time, too drained to cry, too scared to hope. At dawn, Chief Tunde Adewale was back inside the institute. He entered through a private wing few employees ever used, wearing fresh clothes and the expression of a man who had made a decision during the night that would not be undone by anyone's comfort. By 8:30, 3 departments were in panic. He demanded all pending grant files from the last 90 days. He wanted the decline patterns. He wanted the financial scoring criteria. He wanted the names of every child placed on delayed review because their families lacked support matching. He wanted to see internal emails related to emergency cases. And then he asked for Zuri Okoye's file. At first, the staff thought he must know the family personally. He did not. That made it worse, because once the file was opened, the truth became impossible to hide. Zuri's case had been medically urgent. Her surgeon recommendation was clear. The grant fund had enough money to cover her. But her application had been downgraded because the board wanted to preserve more visible charity spending for an upcoming donors gala, where large public cases would create stronger media value. In other words, a child had been pushed toward death because spectacle photographed better than mercy. Chief Adewale read every page without speaking. Then he asked for Kunle. Kunle Adewale arrived 20 minutes later in a tailored suit and a hurry-made smile. He was in his 40s, brilliant, polished, and deeply fluent in the kind of language that makes cruelty sound reasonable. "Uncle," he said, "if I'd known you were coming in." "That is precisely the point," Tunde said. "You did not know." Kunle sat carefully. "There are systems in place for—" Tunde lifted Zuri's file. "Did you read this?" Kunle glanced at the cover. "I read summaries." "Then today you will read consequences." The young nurse who changed everything else was named Adesua Ekanem. She had been on duty when Amina brought Zuri in again that afternoon after the child developed chest pain and dizziness climbing the stairs to their apartment. By then, Amina's composure had begun to crack. She carried herself like someone who understood she was losing time faster than she was losing money. At the reception desk, a clerk told her the grant board was still under review. Amina did not shout. She did not beg. She simply said, "Please call someone who still remembers they work around children." That was the line Adesua heard before stepping in. Within minutes, she arranged for Zuri to be assessed in a side ward, even though administration had not yet cleared admission. There, a young cardiothoracic surgeon named Dr. Ifeoma Balogun met them. Ifeoma was one of those rare doctors who still looked patients in the eye before looking at their chart. She reviewed Zuri's readings, listened to her chest, and asked gentle questions no one had time for anymore. "What did you eat today, brave girl?" Zuri smiled weakly. "Half bread. Mommy said the rest is for later, but I know she gave me all of it." Amina looked away. Ifeoma understood everything in one moment. Not all poverty announces itself loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly in a mother's silence. That same hour, Chief Adewale walked the ward unannounced. No entourage, no photographers, no board members. He passed room after room of machines, filtered air, anxious relatives, and carefully managed appearances. And then he stopped at Zuri's bedside. Amina recognized him instantly. For a second, she thought exhaustion had blurred her mind. The old man from the bus terminal stood inside the most expensive pediatric institute in the city, speaking softly with a nurse who addressed him as Chief. Amina rose slowly from her chair. The old man turned. Their eyes met. And in that one suspended moment, the entire balance of power between them shifted. But what happened next was not what Amina expected. He did not smile grandly. He did not announce himself like a savior from a film. He did not say, "You helped me, so now I will help you." Instead, he walked toward her with the same quiet gravity he had on the rain-soaked bench. "I told you yesterday I once had somewhere to go," he said. "This is the place." Amina stared at him. "You work here?" The nurse beside him nearly answered, but Chief Adewale lifted a hand. "This institute bears my family's name," he said. "And today I discovered it has forgotten why." Amina's fingers tightened around the side of the chair. The room felt suddenly too small to contain what she was hearing. "You," she whispered. "You are the one deciding the grants?" "I built the foundation," he said. Others have been deciding for too long. There are moments when anger becomes stronger than fear. For Amina, this was one of them. She stood fully upright, stepped toward him, and said in a voice that shook with restraint, "Then why did they leave my daughter to wait?" Chief Adewale did not defend himself. Because sometimes guilt is simply truth arriving late. "Because I trusted people I should have watched more closely," he said. "That answer cannot save her." "No," he replied. "But what I do next can." That evening, the boardroom on the top floor of the institute became a battlefield. Kunle arrived with 2 trustees, the legal advisor, and the finance director. They came prepared for a disagreement. They were not prepared for judgment. Chief Adewale projected case files onto the screen, one by one. Not just Zuri's. Dozens of children, delayed, downgraded, reshuffled, or redirected because poverty scored poorly against visibility, donor appeal, or long-term optics. Every euphemism was stripped bare. Every spreadsheet line became a child's face. Every metric became a moral failure. Kunle tried to regain control. "With respect, uncle, this is how modern foundations remain solvent. Emotion cannot run an institution." Chief Adewale leaned forward. "No," he said, "but greed must never run one." The room went still. Then Dr. Ifeoma, who had been invited in unexpectedly, spoke from the far side of the table. "I examined Zuri today," she said. "Her case is urgent. Delaying her further is not administration. It is harm." The finance director muttered about precedent. Chief Adewale answered without looking at him. "Then let today set a better one." By unanimous silence, the emergency grant was reinstated. By direct order, Zuri was scheduled for surgery. By written instruction, all pending downgraded pediatric critical cases were frozen for independent review. And by the end of the night, Kunle understood something he had never truly believed before. An institution can survive bad publicity. It cannot survive the day its founder decides to tell the truth about it. When Amina was told the surgery had been approved, she did not collapse in gratitude the way movies teach people to expect. She simply sat down very slowly, covered her face with both hands, and let out the kind of breath that sounds like pain leaving the body too fast. Zuri looked up from the hospital bed. "Mummy?" Amina lowered her hands and forced a smile through wet eyes. "You are going to be okay," she whispered. Children know when adults are speaking from hope and when they are speaking from fear. This time, Zuri believed her. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. That night was long, longer than rain, longer than memory, longer than all the months of waiting that had led them there. Chief Adewale remained in the hospital long after midnight. He reviewed legacy documents, old photographs, and letters his late wife had written when the foundation was first created. In one letter, she had written, "If our name ever becomes larger than the children we claim to serve, then let the name disappear." He read that line 3 times. Down the hall, Amina sat beside Zuri and told her stories from before sickness entered their lives. She told her about beach trips they never took, mango trees she climbed as a girl, dresses she would sew when Zuri got stronger, and the yellow flower house they would one day live in. At some point, Zuri fell asleep holding her mother's finger. At dawn, she was wheeled toward the operating theater. Hospitals become strange worlds during moments like that. Time no longer moves in minutes. It moves in expressions, in footsteps, in doors opening and closing, in doctors who do not smile until they are sure they should. Amina waited in a corridor chair with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles hurt. Chief Adewale sat several seats away, not intruding, not speaking unless spoken to. Hours passed. At one point, Amina said, without looking at him, "I almost walked past you." He turned. "At the terminal," she said. "I almost kept going." He nodded. Most people did. "I understand why," she said. "Everyone is tired." "Yes," he said. "But tiredness is how cruelty survives. It teaches decent people to keep moving." Amina finally looked at him. "And wealth?" she asked. "What does wealth teach?" The old man answered after a long silence. "If it is not watched carefully," he said, "it teaches distance." Near noon, Dr. Ifeoma emerged still wearing surgical cap and mask around her neck. Her face was tired, but her eyes were clear. Amina stood before the doctor even reached her. "How is she?" Ifeoma smiled. "The procedure went well." For a second, Amina could not process the words. Then they landed, and all the strength she had borrowed from fear gave way at once. She cried into both hands, shoulders shaking, while Adesua caught her before she lost balance. Chief Adewale stood too, but he did not step forward. Some moments belong first to the mother. Later, when Zuri was stable and breathing evenly in recovery, Chief Adewale entered the room alone. He stood at the bedside and watched the child sleep. This was the girl whose file had been reduced to numbers. This was the life the system had nearly pushed aside. This was the cost of trusting respectable people without questioning what they had become. A small notebook lay on the tray beside her bed. He opened it gently. Inside were drawings. Amina with giant hands and a bright smile. A doctor with angel wings. And on one page, an old man under rain holding a cup. Above him, Zuri had written in crooked letters, "The man mummy fed." Tunde closed the notebook and had to steady himself with the rail of the bed. By evening, the institute was already changing. Emergency charity reviews were suspended and rewritten. A new independent pediatric ethics panel was established. Adesua was promoted into patient advocacy oversight. Dr. Ifeoma was asked to lead urgent care review for low-income children. Kunle resigned 2 weeks later, though the public statement called it a strategic transition. But the most important moment did not happen in any boardroom. It happened when Amina, now sitting beside Zuri's bed in a quieter room, looked at Chief Adewale and asked the one question no wealthy benefactor truly wants to hear. "What about the next mother?" He said nothing. Amina continued. "What happens to the woman who does not meet you in the rain? The one who has no dramatic story? The one who has no strength left to chase signatures? The one whose child is just as urgent, but less visible?" Chief Adewale lowered himself into the chair across from her. In all his years of influence, very few people had spoken to him without fear. Fewer still had spoken to him with moral authority. Amina had both. "You can help us," she said softly. "And I will thank God for that for the rest of my life. But if the system stays the same, then kindness is still being used to patch over injustice." The room held still around those words. Finally, the old man nodded. "You are right," he said. "Not, 'I understand.' Not, 'we will look into it.' Not, Change takes time. Just the truth. You are right. Months later, newspapers reported that the Adewale Foundation had launched a permanent emergency access fund for children denied treatment because of poverty. The institute adopted anonymous medical first review standards. Donor galas were scaled back. Administrative bonuses were tied to patient access benchmarks. No child in critical condition could be downgraded for lack of co-funding again. The public called it reform. Chief Adewale called it repentance. As for Amina, she returned home with a daughter whose laughter slowly came back into the room, like sunlight through a window long kept shut. Zuri grew stronger. She started drawing again. This time, the yellow flowers were larger, the houses brighter, the skies less gray. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the window, Zuri handed her mother a new drawing. It showed 3 figures once again: Amina, Zuri, and an old man standing beneath an umbrella. Only this time, behind them, there was a building with open doors. At the top, she had written, "When people remember to be human." Amina kissed her forehead and held the drawing to her chest. Because in the end, the miracle was not that a powerful man had stepped in. The miracle was that compassion had reached him before power had finished hardening him for good. And maybe that is the lesson no institution should ever forget. Sometimes a nation's moral failure can be measured in budgets, policies, and waiting lists. But sometimes, its redemption begins with something far smaller: a tired mother, a paper-wrapped meal, a bench in the rain, and one decision to see a stranger as human when the rest of the world had already looked away. If this story moved you, remember this: kindness is beautiful, but justice is better. Mercy can save one life in a moment. A fair system can save thousands. And somewhere tonight, in some crowded city, another mother is still waiting for a door to open. Let us pray the people behind that door have not forgotten what it means to care.